And we are back with Eliot Spitzer. Eliot, you've spent a lot of time looking at Wall Street, battling with them often. What do you think is the fundamental thing that got us into this mess?
Recklessness, greed, and a misunderstanding of what capitalism is all about, and a belief that financial services alone could generate wealth. Financial services doesn't really generate wealth. The capital markets are designed to raise money and then apportion it to industries that are creative, whether it's biotech or automotive or anything else. Financial services should be a conduit. Instead, we became enamored of the products themselves. And what resulted was this enormous bubble in assets ginned up and supported by financial services sector that, because of a series of improper incentives, got us to where we are right now.
And what should have been done? Should there just have been a lot more attorneys general, like you kind of battling this?
We had one who was enough, I thought, but it was.
Should there have been a different kind of regulation? How should this have been prevented?
There should have been a very different regulatory framework, not in the sense that we needed more words in the books. We needed more aggressive voices at the SEC, the FCC, the FTC, the OCC, this welter of federal agencies, people who came to Wall Street and said, wait a minute, that leverage is crazy. And it's kind of odd because everybody derided leverage in public, but in private participated to the hilt. And when you look back at these deals, you say this was crazy. We needed regulators who said it. We needed wiser voices on Wall Street. This was sort of a disease that got into the bloodstream and the DNA of Wall Street leadership. Now, there were some who were spectacular who disagreed with it, who said, wait a minute, guys, we can't afford this. The more traditional, old-fashioned investment bankers, you think of a Felix Rohatyn, who said, wait a minute, guys, this doesn't work.
Right. Or Warren Buffett, or Paul Volcker.
Look, I love Warren Buffett. We all do. He also invested in some of these vehicles that had the leverage, but I think he always was a voice of modulation. And we needed more of that, and frankly, less of the sort of, hot dog, cowboy mentality that leveraged everything up, sent it out so that people would structure deals without retaining any of the ownership. If you want a technical answer, all the securitization that was done, where you had the rating agencies, you had the originators who would originate loans they knew were bad, securitize them, get AAA ratings, securitize it out into a market. They didn't maintain any ownership. So a simple rule could be, if you securitize a stream of debt, you've got to retain 10, 15, 20%, so you were at risk. You evaluate deals very differently if you are actually at risk rather than merely selling it to somebody else.
And that could have been part of the regulation.
Absolutely. The power of the federal agencies to do this stuff was unlimited. And any time I hear the SEC say, we didn't have the power to do this or that, forget it. They had more people, more power, more money than was necessary. What they lacked was the creativity and the will.
So in a sense, this is almost a greater failure of Washington than Wall Street.
Well, there have been debates, Washington, Wall Street. It's one of those debates where, of course, both were at fault. Now, I happen, having been on the government side, to have a slightly more aggressive view of what government should do, perhaps. And I believe that Wall Street was at fault for fostering an ideology and imposing an ideology or buying its way into an ideology in Washington that said, let us alone, we will self-regulate. So Wall Street created this notion of self-regulation, sold it to Washington with all of its tremendous capacity through fundraising and intellectual capital. Washington was happy enough to succumb to the temptation. Self-regulation was a mirage. It was an abject failure. Some of us were saying it always will be a failure. So Wall Street is to be blamed for creating the notion. Washington is to be blamed for buying into it. Who's more at fault is sort of a puerile debate, but I think both parties.
What about the media, CNBC? You actually know Jim Cramer. You know all the parties involved.
Full disclosure, Jim is a great and close friend, and I think he took his licks from Jon Stewart last week, and Jim said on the show, yes, we have to have done better. And I think the media writ large, forget CNBC, I think the entire media, print media, TV media, etc., did not ask the hard questions as these deals were being structured, as the bubble was inflating. We turned the Wall Street masters of the universe into these icons who bestrode the universe and made no mistakes, when I think a more inquisitive attitude would have said, wait a minute, guys, this won't last. And so I think, yes, we're all at fault, which is why the search for villains is emotionally satisfying not terribly useful. The better effort is, okay, what do we learn? What do we do going forward?
Now, a lot of people look at your prosecutions and they say, look, this was very unfair, very selective. You would threaten these companies, therefore plunging their stock price. In many cases, you didn't get convictions. If this is the model, it's not going to work. It's unfair.
Well, I think they're wrong, needless to say. But I think if you look at the cases, the analyst cases, where we highlighted, you referred to the Merrill Lynch case, where at the end we got Merrill, Goldman, Bank of America, all the major firms, all the bulge bracket firms, to agree to an entirely new structure of doing analytical work, which was necessary for the integrity of the marketplace. Whether it was insurance, mutual funds, analytical work, on and on, each of the major areas we looked at, we sought to craft a solution.
But your real leverage was that once you go out in the public, sure, their share price starts dropping. And
no question about it. And I'll give you a real example of that, and you can evaluate it as you wish. With Merrill Lynch, they wanted us to settle. They would have paid some money, but they said, you must keep all the evidence secret. And I said, no, my job as a public prosecutor is to explain to the public what the problems are in Wall Street. I said, that is the only way we will get a remedy. And I said, we must present this to the public. It may be right, it may be wrong. And we didn't do this to hurt individuals, and we took out the names of most of the individuals, but we said the public has to understand why the market is flawed. And I think it's fair to say we, several years ahead of time, were saying, be careful. Be aware of what is going on here. Not pretending to see everything, not pretending to be smarter or better than anybody else, just saying, wait a minute, we have seen a problem that, if not addressed, will be the downfall of the market.
But you got very few convictions.
No, well, first of all, most of the cases were civil cases. And there was a reason for that. I did not believe in taking one individual and making him the subject of all the venom. I said, this is a civil issue. Resolve it with the company. I tried very hard not to vilify individuals, because it wasn't a mid-level executive who was the problem. It was the whole structure. And that's why the global deal was with all the banks. We didn't say to individual X, you're the problem. That's a mirage. That is an emotional, as I said, an emotionally satisfying effort, but it would not have solved the problem.
And